Good morning and welcome. Really do appreciate my big crowd coming to see us. The Peace Institute at Spokane Community College welcomes you all to our podcast series. My name is Katie Garrett, Student Ambassador for the Peace Institute at Spokane Community College. We are happy to present to you our 8th visual podcast with today's theme, the Cohousing Revolution. With us this morning is our honored guest, Dr. Jim Moore, Associate Chief of Culture and Development for Spokane Colleges, sharing insights on today's event. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you for inviting me up. And good morning, everyone. And welcome to Building Peace Through Shared Spaces, the Co-Housing Revolution. As was said, my name is Jim Moore, and I serve as the Associate Chief of Culture and Talent Development for Spokane Colleges. It's a fancy title that just means I help create professional development opportunities for people at Spokane Colleges. I'm honored to open this conversation as it is one that invites us not just to think about how we live, but how we live together. How do we live in connection? And that's really important distinction and an important direction during this time. And it's a time when so many Americans are feeling more isolated than ever, when loneliness is being called a public health crisis, when peace and justice in our neighborhoods and the world seem distant, and social fragmentation is leaving people disconnected from their neighbors and their communities, this conversation today could not be more timely. When we talk about peace and justice, it's easy to think on a grand scale of treaties, summits, global efforts, but they do not, peace and justice, they do not start in boardrooms or summits. They start at home and in the everyday places where we live our lives. Peace and justice are in our connections to our neighbors and community. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, and I'm quoting a bit of it here, "Where, after all, do universal rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person. The neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works, such are the places where every man, woman, and child seek equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity, without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere." So to me, this quote resonates so deeply today because in a fragmented world, choosing shared spaces are radical choices for justice, equal opportunity, and dignity. In shared spaces, we can find our way to peace and justice because we are choosing connection over convenience and community over isolation. Co-housing is one way we rebuild what's been lost. It's not just a different kind of neighborhood, it's a different kind of hope. It's a different kind of commitment. It is a commitment to live with intention, a place where relationships are designed into the architecture, where peace and connection are not just abstract ideas, but practice through shared meals, collaborative decisions, and neighbors who show up not just when it's easy, but when it matters most. It reflects a shared responsibility in creating a place where dignity and belonging are not luxuries, but basic expectations of how we live together. In these communities, peace and connection may be a child growing up with more than one adult who knows and cares for them, a neighbor watering their plants when you're away, a walkway where neighbors don't just pass by, but they pause, a shared meal that turns strangers into a chosen family. These are not grand gestures, and that's the point. Peace is not always loud. Sometimes it's built in the quiet rhythm of neighbors choosing one another again and again and again. And in a time when disconnection and violence seem to be the norm, these simple actions become revolutionary. And this is why today's session matters, because co-housing is about more than design. It's about finding our common humanity in one another again. It's a framework for belonging, a model for inclusion, and a path toward a kind of peace and connection that's woven into our everyday life. It gives life to Dr. Martin Luther King's vision of a beloved community. So as we begin today, I invite you to reflect on those small places close to home and how we might reclaim them as spaces for peace, belonging, and joy. Thank you very much, and welcome to the session. I am excited about the conversation.
Okay, Katie. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jim. Next, we welcome Professor Rob Vogel, Department of Communication Studies, to introduce our expert panel.
Thank you, Katie. The Peace Studies Institute of Spokane Community College presents authors Dr. Scott Finney and Professor Angela Davis Wisner in a dialogue. Voices Unmuted. This episode, The Co-Housing Revolution. Our guests for today's panel are Grace Kim, Kirsten Dahlquist, and David Edwards. Grace Kim is a licensed architect and co-founding principal of Schemata Workshop, an architecture and urban design practice based in Seattle. Her work emphasizes community, social equity, and sustainability in architectural design. Grace co-founded Capitol Hill Urban Co-Housing, where she lives and works integrating community and urban farming. She's a strategic leader, playing a key role in city planning, affordable housing, and community-led design initiatives. Kirsten Dahlquist has 17 years of experience as a licensed architect. She empowers human connection and cultural continuity and has led projects with tribal nations, healthcare providers, nonprofits, and community leaders. Her work is deeply rooted in listening, placekeeping, and systems thinking, blending large-scale vision with fine detail. Kirsten reimagines the built environment as a catalyst for social change, emphasizing community engagement, equity, and cultural continuity. David Edwards is a licensed architect and award-winning educator at Spokane Community College. He's an industry veteran working in building design with experience across multiple disciplines. Focusing on partnership, David fosters peace through community building and intercultural literacy. Outside the classroom, David is an artist, writer, and an outdoor enthusiast. Let's welcome our leaders in architecture.
And yes, thank you, Rob, for that intro there. I do want to, as a part of this panel, we're just astounded to have you three together. We are extremely pleased with your background, your commitment, and your compassion toward the matter of co-housing. I'd like to look at this slide here. If everyone can pay attention to this brief definition, it points out that co-housing is a form of intentional community. And this is I would say, the heart of what co-housing is really all about. Still living in private homes, but as you can see there, there's a sharing of common spaces, a sharing of common resources, and a sharing of a fostering, a co-mutual fostering with a strong sense of connection and collaboration. So when we think of co-housing, we should think of those two words, connection and collaboration. It's designed to encourage interaction while respecting privacy, composed of shared facilities and, of course, like kitchens, gardens, workshops, making everyday life more social, more efficient, and more community-centered. And this is the heart of our panel discussion today. Let's get started. What do you think? Shall we go with it?
Thank you for providing an overview of co-housing. Let's get to the details and the experts. The first slide, Katie, can you put on that first quote? Oh, there it is. I love this quote by Grace Kim. The antidote to isolation is connectedness. Can you start us with that and give us an idea of what you were thinking with that idea?
So I think that as Americans, we have, over the last, I don't know, couple generations, moved away from being a community of people that support each other in villages to being fiercely independent. And I think that has happened over a couple of generations. And I think we see ourselves today as these nuclear families that we were so much striving for. That has created these bubbles of isolation around us. There are children that are isolated in our communities. There are elders isolated in our communities. And even amongst adults, there's a strong desire to not look at each other and just maintain independence to our detriment. And I think that we were seeing before the pandemic, before Corona virus, that people were getting isolated, and that was a silent pandemic that was happening. And when COVID-19 hit and everybody was isolated because of the virus, I think everyone became much more aware of it. The level of mental illness and calls to psychiatrists over the phone increased dramatically. And I think that's a big indicator of where we are as a nation. And I think that's everyone's craving connection. Everyone is looking for that sense of belonging and being part of a bigger community, a bigger tribe, a bigger group. And that's, I think, what co-housing can offer.
Yeah, thank you. Kirsten, how does architecture serve as a catalyst for social change in your specific work?
Okay, let's see. How does architecture serve as a catalyst? I think it provides the vehicle to bring people together, because Grace just mentioned isolation, and a lot of the projects that I work on do create those social vehicles. So we work on community centers, food banks, behavioral health facilities, community centers for tribal nations, and so we are deliberate in how we design that space to support collaboration and community. What we are locating spaces so they are adjacent to each other, they create interaction, they represent the people that are using those spaces, and I think that is something that is super important when we're creating these catalysts. It's important to acknowledge that as an architect myself, that I bring an inherent bias to some of the work, and it's really important for me to check that at the door, so to speak. And so how can I represent the people that I'm serving most authentically? So.
Great, appreciate it.
So interesting. We've got our educator on the panel, David Edwards from Architectural Design here at Spokane Community College. You've got your students behind you supporting you. How do you integrate community building into your architectural design work here? You're in a different world than them.
Well, I would say that it's really important to me in the classroom that I build a sense of community within the students. And for me, when I look at student success, a lot of that is building a sense of community, or helping students build a sense of community amongst themselves. So I am very intentional in how I deliver the content and how I have them interact with one another and how we go do things as a group to build that sense of community. And I think, as an architect, we have to know our clients and really kind of get into their head, kind of like what Kirsten was just saying, that she, we all would have an inherent bias that we come into it with. So what I try to teach my students is how do you really investigate someone and what their needs are. But I want them to know specifically the importance of building community. So in our culture, we're given all these different ideas of what brings happiness, and it's kind of like, fame, fortune, nice things, but those are all very fleeting. And what brings kind of more effective happiness and more long-term happiness? It's several things, but one of them that's really, really integral is building a sense of community. So as my students are learning about how to know a client's needs, I want them to also know, okay, how do we help build community for these people? So I actually have an assignment for my students where they watch Grace's videos and then write reflections on it. And I've had assignments where we study tribal culture because, as you know, Grace was saying, that it used to be that humans, when we lived in tribes, we had this really great sense of community, and we've really lost that. And so it was a really interesting experience to go study tribal culture to realize, like, oh, this is actually really beautiful, and how can we get there? And so I've been quite inspired with Kirsten's firm and all the work that they've done for the different tribes, and how you have to think a little bit differently. And it's not just, oh, let's design a building that ends up on the cover of a architecture publication because that looks cool, but is it really good at providing built environment that changes people for the better?
Great, appreciate that. Thank you, David. Grace, this question's for you. How does living in a co-housing community shape your approach to design?
So I'm fascinated. I want to hear this.
So I would say my experience living in community has taught me to be very patient and listen deeply. And I think that's the thing that that I can easily draw from my experience there. I think like Kirsten said, not checking your bias and your ego at the door and really listening deeply to, and not anticipating what the client is going to say and what their experiences are. And that's definitely something that I have learned in the last decade or more of living in community. I think as architects, we're trained to be the experts, and it's easy for us to walk into a room when a client has hired us thinking that we know it all. And we know what we know as architects about buildings, but they're the experts of their organization, their cultural customs. They're the experts of themselves. And so if we're going to be architects truly in service of them, then we need to be really great listeners.
Before we move on, this is fascinating. She lives in her co-housing environment. Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask? We have architectural students in the audience. Joe?
Hi, I'm curious, are people easily taken to this co-housing? Or do you have to break some barriers where people, they're independent? I like me, everybody in a single family home and big yard or whatever. So do you have to kind of educate them to the benefits of that? Or people take to co-housing, intent co-housing, I'm assuming, relatively easily?
So the question was, do we have to do a lot of recruiting or educating to convince people to live in co-housing? I would say we don't. I think a lot of people that come to find co-housing are on a personal journey of they're not feeling connected. They're questioning their kind of their living situation and what's next in the next chapter of their lives. So oftentimes people come to co-housing because they are in search of something else. And so they'll, stumble upon it, or they've been thinking about it for decades with their friends. Like I know lots of women that are like, when our husbands all die, we're all going to go buy an apartment building and live together. It's like, well, why wait till your husbands die? That's always what I'm thinking. So I think it's certainly when we have an opening, we've only had one opening in the 9 years we've been living together. So last year when we had that opening, we were like, we're not sure if anyone's going to want to join us. We have a little bit of a different model in terms of ownership structure. And sure enough, when we put out our advertisement, I think on Saturday, by Monday we had 9 people that had gone through the website, read through the materials, filled out a questionnaire, and they were ready and interested. So I think that for us, we were kind of surprised. Like, we are a little bit of an odd duck, and would people really want to live in our kind of weird ownership structure? And we found that there were. So I think that there are people looking for community and connection in different ways. And I would say we're not out to convert anyone. This is not for everybody. There's there's lots of choices, and this is just one of the choices that's out there.
And that makes sense. I wonder if you're going to just a grand scale to provide co-housing on more public scale. But a follow-up question. I'm more from the building side. I work for a building firm. have you had any issues with building departments? But if you're doing tribal, you're probably doing it.
So the question was, have we had problems with the building departments? And I would say no, because as was stated earlier, the most important thing about co-housing is intention. So we might say in our land use application that we're a co-housing community, but we don't really make a big deal about it because the physical structures are not unlike any single-family home development, apartment complex, townhouse development. So the physical structures are like anything else. They fit under the normal building codes. We try to convince our clients to buy land that is ready for what you're trying to do. Don't go buy farmland and try to put 30 homes on it. Right, exactly.
We've got some pictures up here of your life, Grace. Can you give us a visual of what your housing looks like inside and how your people that live with you, how does it work? Tell us. You're having breakfast in the morning. What's it like?
So I'm having breakfast with my family or myself in my home. So my home has everything that your home has. It has a kitchen, dining room, bedrooms, bathrooms, everything. So if we close our door, we're like in any other apartment building in any other place in the country. Once we step outside our door, we might run into our neighbors that might be coming or going in the morning. And the one thing that we can count on every day or every other day is having a meal together. So we eat together 3 times a week, every other night, more or less, except for Saturdays. And the thing that so when I'm up in the morning, if I look across and I don't see my neighbors moving around, I know Shayla and Spencer well, so I kind of know their daily patterns. If I don't see them, then I go through in my head, are they on vacation? Are they out riding somewhere? And if I don't see them at dinner, I'm gonna go knock on their door because I know that something must be up if they're not around. There are kids playing in the courtyard. When I look outside, I can see not only across, but I can see down into our courtyard. There's usually Mikey or one of the other kids is playing basketball or even rollerblade hockey. Our courtyard's not big, but it gets used very robustly. In the evening, it might be typical in the summertime to go up to the roof and have a drink, and there might be 1 or 2 other adults up there or somebody gardening. So it's very interconnected in terms of the things that we're doing on a daily basis.
Just fascinating. Question? Yes, Rob. Go ahead and give him the microphone so he can.
You're okay.
You guys mentioned listening deeply, and then another one about checking ego and biases at the door. And I was curious about listening deeply to what? I guess I'm assuming their concerns, but could you explain that more? But also the idea of checking ego and bias. I'm curious about how you do that and why you need to do that, or feel the need to do that.
Yeah, I can speak to the listening portion. So in the work that we do, we intentionally schedule client engagement sessions prior to putting pencil to paper at all. We sit down, we develop some questions prior to this meeting with the client or the client group that will help us understand what's working well about what they have right now, what they see that's not working well, and what they see could be a measure of success about whenever this facility goes online that we are designing for them. And then throughout those questions, we tend to get personal stories about experiences or stories, if we're working with a tribal nation, something having to do with the tribal legacy. And so we start to get a glimpse of what their overall goals are, what their hopes and dreams are. And I think that's just the beginning. So essentially we hope to foster a really lasting trust with them.
Let's follow up on that. What have you learned from working with tribal nations? We're fascinated about that. Give us an insight into working with the tribal nations in regard to your area.
I think the most important thing that I've learned is that no tribal nation is the same. When we come to have the opportunity or the privilege of working with the tribal nation, we start by doing a lot of research about what is publicly out there, but then also having these listening sessions and connecting with tribal elders and the tribal council and tribal members. We really try to create a building that represents them. I always say, this is not my building. This is your building, and I want to partner with you. I'm in service of you. You know, I think also a lot about how my personal definition of being an architect has changed from, I'm going to design this grand building, to being in service to a population that is looking to move ahead. They're looking to lift up their underrepresented members. They're looking to overcome isolation. They're looking to overcome wellness challenges. They're really trying to move their population towards success and health and peace. So.
That's inspiring. Yeah, it's very inspiring. You know, Kirsten, along that line, before I go to my next question for you, David, I once saw a picture of a Western-style ranch home on a reservation, and the indigenous brothers and sisters had cut a hole in the roof and had a teepee sticking out from it. When something like that is the disparity of what Rob, you mentioned, this bias and so on, how do you open up the honesty of a group of folks that feel a certain way that is completely different from the Eurocentric approach to living? What do you do to make them feel comfortable enough to be honest about it? And then how do you honor it? How do you respect it?
That's a really good question. I think one of the things I lead with is that we try to meet them where they are. I think for some projects at the beginning, Zoom or a Teams call might not work to start these listening sessions. We go to the reservation. We go to the tribal council meetings. We go to them, because if they come to us, it means they're kind of out of their element. We want to start that level of trust. And let's see these things take time. You can't rush this. And I think, what I guess. We also have the benefit of working with a tribe over several projects, which is a huge privilege, over multiple different project types. And so I say we are still learning. We are still learning, and we are still working on building that trust.
I appreciate that. The key is that cultural humility rather than cultural competency. I appreciate that. David, a question for you. The word educate is taken from the Latin word educare, which means to draw out. So how do you inspire students to see architecture as a tool for peace and social good? How do you draw out that potential, that capacity in students to see that this architectural instrumentality is really for a way to promote peace and to promote social good?
Yeah, I'm very intentional about trying to help my students learn how other people think and live and interact. I think that, we're all subject to just knowing what was our experience growing up, and then just sort of assuming that that's what the rest of the world is like. So I do try to encourage my students to know about other cultures, but also just to kind of give them examples of ways in which architects change the world, right? Like this, I think I went into architecture like, oh, I love beautiful buildings, I want to be a part of that. And then now here I am all these years later, I'm like, oh, that's still important, but that's not the most important. The most important is designing a building that, like I said before, impacts people's interaction. There's so much power to do good that I think once students just start to kind of get that idea of that ability to do that, to cause social change, that they get much more excited about architecture, right? So it's a much more amazing thing for them. And I think that I also just try to model that I truly believe that every one of my students is my superior. So it's something, right? Like I know some things that they don't know, but they know things that I don't know. And so it's much more of like a collaboration, like let's all go on this journey together. And I might say like, I don't know how to do this thing, but I think that we should do it. Should we go figure this out together? And I think too, that I try to make sure that everybody in my classroom feels really valued and important, and I want them to take that to their design world, so that if they're designing a community or whatever, they don't just think like, well, who are the people with the money or the power, and then I'll just design for them, but to really look through and like, okay, I want to hear from every single person, and very thoroughly, yeah.
The students have a beautiful display in the foyer of their work, and that's a result of David's dedication. I hope you get a chance to look at it. Grace, I have a question I'm interested in. How does Capitol Hill Urban Co-Housing incorporate urban farming? I'm interested in that, urban farming.
Sure. So we have chosen to plant our rooftop with garden beds, and that meant we had to design for it, have the structural engineering for it, so that it would bear the weight of that. I can't remember how many square feet of planting space there is, but there's basically half of the building is covered with raised beds, and we are able to farm the rooftop so that we have produce for the summer, more than enough that we can eat. We actually have to try to push it off to my coworkers or to the neighbors in the greater neighborhood. And we had at one time a partnership with a couple restaurants, one every year, that were very local. One was right next door, and the other one was maybe about 6 blocks away, with the intent of having farm to table be very, very proximate. During COVID, we decided actually to switch over and provide that produce to the local food bank, recognizing that that would have greater impact to people. So the farming is, and not everyone's involved in the farming. I would say there's a team, I'm on that team of 3. We do most of the activities. We always encourage people to harvest, but sometimes I have to harvest and stick it in the common house and say, come and get it. But there are a couple of days where it's kind of community-wide. We'll have a big soil turning party in February or March, depending on the weather, and we'll get 30 bags of compost and soil, and everybody comes out to help weed and turn the soil and get the new nutrients into the ground, which is great for the little kids whose parents don't garden, for them to understand and get to learn that carrots don't come out of a cellophane bag in the grocery store. They actually come out of the ground first and then go into those cellophane bags, and ideally just go straight into their mouths. So that's a big part of our ethos around farming, and we're calling it farming more than gardening because we want it to be more of active food production and things that we eat in our common meals and things like that. So it's not just, and we do have lots of like wildflowers or other flowers just to help with the pollinators, because we're trying to grow zucchini. That's one of the things we cannot grow up there for some reason. So that's a thing that we're trying to teach the kids actively of where our food comes from and that cycle of growing things.
This is so exciting. I'm interested in, have you looked globally and been inspired by any countries doing this kind of stuff? Because when I think of this, you think in certain villages how beautifully it would work. So I'm just curious if you looked around the world, who's doing what's great out there?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of cultures that are doing things organically that are not co-housing, but I will say that I've traveled extensively in Denmark to visit co-housing communities there, which is where co-housing started. But most recently, I was in Belgium last summer, and a fellow that I met probably in 2009 came to a co-housing conference in Seattle, and I've been in touch with him since, and so I got to go visit him last year. In the last, I don't know how many years that is, like the last 16 years, he's built 30 co-housing communities in the little nation of Belgium. And they're beautiful. Many of them are adaptive reuse projects. He was joking while we were there, he bought a monastery, and he said, I'm known around the country that if there's an old, odd building that they're trying to preserve, they'll come and call me to figure out how to preserve it. And the projects are all beautiful. They win national design awards in the country, and they're I think that he's doing some really amazing work there.
That's great. Excellent. Before I somewhat close here, is there any more questions among the audience and as well as here? Okay, we have one question there. We have a couple of students here with questions. Excellent. Okay.
This antidote to isolation kind of language is really speaking to me, but what drew me in was just a general sense of disenfranchisement and disillusion with our housing industry and our economic processes. I feel like my need for housing is I'm being exploited through that need. I don't like landlords, I don't like renting, and the idea of home ownership seems more and more unattainable with each passing year. So I'm wondering, how can I use this structure of co-housing to empower myself and those around me?
I can start this. So I would say that in our country, we have turned home into commodity. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next hour. But in other countries where there's social housing, housing is just a thing that is provided to everybody. And the government might provide the housing, or developers might provide it, but it's all sort of not jacked up to the rates that they are here in the US right now. And if we could get away from the idea of my home is a place where I can park my wealth or create generational wealth, and think about home is where I'm building community, then we would have a very different mindset. And I would say for you, think about, if you're living in an apartment building now, could you contact the owner and ask them if he or she would be willing to sell it to you? I just met somebody this weekend, and that's what they've done. He was frustrated by the fact that the landlord wasn't keeping up with maintenance and repairs. And in one frustrated night, while he was trying to figure out how to get his kitchen fixed, he emailed the landlord and said, "Would you rent it or sell it to us?" And the guy actually wrote back and said yes. So he's actively trying to figure out now how to convert his apartment building into a co-op, and convincing his neighbors to help join in. And he's been working on this for a couple months, and I think he's going to be successful.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, and I think we have a question or two back here.
So my question was for Grace. How has living in co-housing changed how you bring community to your firm and office?
So the way that I do that is I always sneak in a little co-housing. We do a lot of affordable housing, and there's many principles that I think, I would say there's times where I feel like I'm always serving out the co-housing Kool-Aid, because there's many things that I think the general population, lots of different groups would benefit from, including the tribes. And so when we do our affordable housing projects, I always think about how can I encourage social interaction, how can I intentionally create opportunities for people to bump into each other. And somebody one day said, or accused me of social engineering the space, and I was like, is that a bad thing or a good thing? When he said it, I was like, that sounds great. So we very much intentionally try to think about how to bring people together, recognizing that's something that everybody needs and wants.
My question is also for Grace. I know that researching and building a structure is different than experiencing the space yourself. Now that you've lived in your building and you've had many years in co-housing, how would you build your current building differently?
So my husband does tours every month, and when he gets that question, he says, point to anything in the building and I can tell you what we actually intended versus what we have, right? So I think the important thing for us is there were many times that we were, let's do living building, let's have all these aspirations. The reality is, if we couldn't move in because we couldn't make the budget, then it's only a dream, right? And I think for us, there are lots of compromises that we made architecturally. The building's fine, it's not gonna win any big national design awards, but the community that we have is something that we would not change for, trade for anything. And I would say for soon-to-be architects or folks that are practicing, going to your projects after they're finished. Not just our building, but I have stayed over at co-housing communities that we've designed and built. it's really important to do that post-occupancy. It doesn't have to be a formal post-occupancy, but talking to the people that live in the building or inhabit or go to work in the buildings that you work on is really important to find out what's working, what's not working, so that you can take those lessons forward into your next projects.
Great, excellent. Okay, well, I think I'd like to thank you all for coming today, and especially, yeah, please, would you like to address first?
Yeah, if I could just address the question about kind of jumping into co-housing. So I took my students to visit a co-housing community here in Spokane, Haystack Heights, and it was interesting because I think some of the students were a little bit reticent. They're like, oh, where is he dragging us this time? But am I right that at the end of it, all the students were like, this was super cool. And there's actually a unit for sale in that community right now, and it's at like $400,000, which sounds like a lot for a 2-bedroom home. But you also have like all these shared items, right? There's just like this whole area of like, do you need luggage or a bicycle or a blender, just anything? Like you can just borrow it from your neighbors. It's just like everybody puts their stuff in general storage and you can just borrow it. And then they share a garden and a chicken coop and a meditation studio and a music thing. And you can have dinner, really nice dinner for $5. I mean, like there's all these things that go with it that are really, really intriguing.
That's great. Thank you, David, for sharing that invaluable PS to this whole session today. Dr. King used nonviolence to, in his eyes, redeem the soul of America. And I believe co-housing today is also another means or instrumentality to redeem the soul of America in relation to our community and our collective kind of sense. I have a quote from Coretta Scott King, the widow of Dr. King, and she said this: "The greatness of a community is most accurately measured by the compassionate actions of its members." And I think today you three have surely amplified that very quote, and we want to thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you all for coming. This concludes our 8th session of Voices Unmuted, a series that we've been quite happy to involve the community and experts like you who are devoted to redeeming the soul of America. So thank you for what you do, and thank you, students, for attending.
Please join us at 9:30. Grace Kim will be doing her keynote address individually so you can hear the details of co-housing. Thanks a lot.